Sometimes that is...
No, 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 no. Now we got that out of the way. That's right, I'm back talking about Silent Hill 2 again. And what a weird journey it's been. In a way, this remake got a lot of you to check out my channel, as that video on Bloober Team's previous games went somewhat viral, even with its crappy audio. And while the catalyst for that video was based on my salty reaction to a rumour that Silent Hill 2 was indeed getting a remake, after playing their games and getting a taste for their style, I was pleasantly surprised. Sure, there was a few games that didn't grab me, but overall their passion to create diverse if creaky horror games was infectious. So instead of stewing in the sauce, that experience got me to branch out further from my gaming echo chamber to try out other things like walk sims. Another video that, if it wasn't for this one, would have probably never happened. So now all those terminally online knobs have moved on to clutch their pearls about something else, we can finally have a chill chat about the main event. So let's slap this reconstituted meat and see if it's kosher. We start this tale with the handsome retextured face of our protag, James Sunderland, who, once again, is staring at the titular town, pondering over a letter his wife sent him, asking to meet her behind the bins at Poundland, aka their special place. The problem is, she has been dead for the last 3 years, so Jimmy, being a sad sack with no hobbies apart from drinking himself brain damaged and acting bewildered to the point of parody, and sorry, I'm getting a strong sense of deja vu. Alright, first off, I won't be digging into this story here, as I've already done that in my original review, links below. And honestly, do we really need another video by some over-opinionated preening tosspots relaying this damn story? Of course not, because my jaw is too busy hitting the floor over the f***ing visuals. If the first bite is with the eye, then this remake gobbled my shitting face off. Sure, the approach to town in the original was great, but now, with the camera frame behind James, it kind of feels like you're being put in there. With, of course, the OST evoking that dread with each step, which of course you can see in the mud, which is attention to detail so inconsequential. Oh wait, where is the Comic Sans fonted sign? Yes, I know this is a new adaptation, but still, there is a lineage here. There is a legacy. And Bloober Team right now is ruining that legacy by not including this little insignificant sign. If you're not going to enhance the thing that makes this game even better, then why even bother? And I should know, I am a Silent Hill fan, I've read all the things, I've watched all the things, Actually, if you no-click past the gate and go into the barn, you will see the proper sign. That's just chilling in there. And we are 10 minutes in, and I'm already geeking out over this completely unnecessary Easter egg. And whoever put that in deserves to get their salad tossed for life. And the further we walk towards the foggy streets, my brain cannot fathom that this game is actually real. In a way, it seems like Bloober has gone full circle here, with their first game being inspired by PT, to then getting Leather Trouser Enthusiast, the Kiri Yamaoka on the OST, in the medium. It seems that our Polish poly pushers were always playing the long game. Also, their experience with creating walking simulators gives them an edge in making the drudgery we take for granted entertaining. Like, there's always something that catches your eye, from random shops filled with supplies, to the sheer amount of grungy detail fleshing out this world. It puts you on edge right away, without the goriness of modern horror. There are no scripted jump scares, or any of that bullshit. Like the original, it's just you, in a world that doesn't care about your existence in a passive-aggressive way, just like in real life. Also, in a fun remix, you are no longer signposted to an awkward end of town to beat your first ballsack to death with a piece of timber. Now you end up in a grotty house in town, with that same ballsack gleaming in ray-traced lube. And here you discover Jimmy has been eating his Weetabix. And I will admit, seeing Jimmy dodging around with iframes made me chuckle just by its absurdity. But then I quickly realised, as I was stomping this vagina with legs into the shag pile, that the combat feels pretty good. Sure, it's the same basic bitch melee gameplay we have seen in most modern horror games like the Callisto Protocol or The Last of Us, which I still can't believe I can use as a modern day comparison. For fuck's sake, Neil, stop remastering it. But even with this new approach, the brawling still feels desperate. And yes, we all know James isn't trained in CQC, so seeing him ducking and diving like a disgraced children's TV presenter is indeed odd. Regardless, I love this more aggressive take. And instead of just running past like I would in the original, because trying to take them on was like beating an elderly person with a pool noodle, now I tittered with glee with every crunchy blow. And ironically, I find it funny that the jank-ass combat in Homecoming became the zeitgeist of this series. Perhaps the essayists will now turn face and admit that Silent Hill shitpost is good after all. No, I'm kidding. I had you going there for a second, didn't I? Didn't I, you gullible mook? Admit it! Anyway, now that we're armed and somewhat dangerous, it's time to bungle into a puzzle that puts you on a mini journey around the town, and oh hey look, a jukebox. I wonder if Coconut's on here. Ah. And this is where the structure of the remake further deviates. While the original is pretty chaste when it comes to the town itself, as it's mostly a vibey wrapper between one place and another, the remake instead gives you a fetch quest as an excuse to explore. And honestly, it's a welcome one, especially when I found out that you can break the windows of every car. Perhaps Fred Durst had a point. And while I could show you all the footage of me breaking stuff like a mildly depressed hooligan, with the power of editing and Jimmy's Timberlands, I grabbed all the bits needed to finally hit number 6 on the jukebox, which then gives Jimmy a flash of clarity on what to do next, like a microwave going f***ing ping. And no, I'm not giving you a blow-by-blow account of the entire game. I just wanted to highlight the loop of SH2R. While a standard survival horror affair in most parts, the way it pushed me to explore every nook and cranny was a novel twist. In a way, you can see and feel how Bloober is a student of the game, even beyond Silent Hill, and these intricate urbex tangents are proof of this, with a confidence in its design that most reinterpretations seem to lack. Instead of copying the original beat for beat, these tiny moments show off how they deviated from the source material, or slowing and reverbing the original stuff to make it even bigger, and anything that didn't make this cut being given a nostalgic nod. While this looks like shallow pandering, there is a cheeky story twist here, and while it's not canon, because we all know that the lore of this franchise is so rich and compelling, yes, that is sarcasm, these nods are apparently a hint of our hero going through this pilgrimage of pain multiple times, like he's going through a loop, and while this is speculation, it certainly gives a layer of mystery to the proceedings. But what brings it all together for me is the sound design, and usually I hate making sweeping statements, apart from the hit game Outlast being the drizzling shits, but I will put my todger on the line and say that the Silent Hill 2 remake is one of the best sounding games I have ever heard. Granted, Bloober's back catalogue always sounded good, if you can ignore the odd lick of cheesy voice acting, but just like the perfectly rendered fog, the audible dread is great. Its subtle use of ambience and effects give these dusty domiciles that creepy crust, Just the creaking of the floorboards on a Jimmy size 12s is enough to send a shiver down your spine, and the water running down the staircase is making my bladder do cartwheels. And then this merry march gets interrupted by the shrieks of your pocket radio, notifying you that the embodiment of Sunday's sexual tensions draws near. So with violent intent, you whip out his splintered representation of his knob to give this fleshlight the pounding of its miserable life. Yes, the mannequins are back, and yes, they are as creepy as ever, and now they have a new party trick of hiding in the dark, either in corners or under tables in horny anticipation. Whoa. Is it getting a bit sexy in here, or is it just me? And while we time jump past this embarrassing display of BDSM, this block of flats is now shitting itself into its rusty splendor, which is of course the otherworld, which in my opinion is looking very homecoming. But unlike everything else in that dustbin filled with gone off porridge, its take on this hellscape was the best thing about it. So I'm doubly stoked to see the remake using it as the basis of their own reimagining. And to me, in less big bloated fucking words, it's cocking stunning. If there's something I could say about the original Silent Hill 2, its version of this twisted dimension was an afterthought. Sure, you get that steady build-up that blooms once you hit the historical society, and yes, that is foreshadowing. Here in the remake, it's having its corroded cake and eating it, with all the presentation things I was gurning at earlier coming together in this festive collage. Hell, even yours truly is scribbled on the walls, like a desperate barfly looking for oral sex. Okay, it's just a coincidence, but it did make me chuckle, unlike these chuckle fucks. And speaking of agents of mirth, the angular ass face himself makes his presence known. And even now, nearly 25 years later, I still smile seeing Jimmy pulling out the blicky to flick P-chan's nose with a wet feather. Oh, just look at that scared idiot. That was another thing, in my opinion, that was in desperate need of an upgrade, and now with the remake, the acting matches the mood, with the thespian playing our protag Luke Roberts doing a slap-up job. His depiction gives this dreary toss rag some spice, to complement his Olympic levels of previously mentioned bewilderment. Hell, he's not even my favourite character, as Angela, you know, the one, quote, femoid that all the online weirdos got obsessed with photoshopping her mug to make it more, quote, feminine, when we all know what they really want to see as their twisted representation of gender norms, has been given a welcome overhaul by actress Gianna Keel. And case in point, here in the graveyard scene at the start of the game, you can see their interaction.
This town, there's something wrong with it. And it's not just the fog either.
Is it dangerous?
Maybe. It's kind of hard to explain, but
I'll be careful.
I'm not lying.
No, I believe you. It's just... I guess I don't really care if it's dangerous or not. I'm going either way.
While the OG sets the mood, even though it makes you question if everyone is 2 bricks short of a f***ing coal shed, here we still get that, but now it feels a lot more natural, and I got this feeling of a 90s indie flick. It's still performative, but it has that grit that makes it believable. And I'm not saying that the original in this aspect was bad, no, it just hits differently. And this was making the remake novel to me. And while we're making comparisons, in my opinion, the boss fights are much better here than whatever the the classic was trying to do. Granted, most boss fights in survival horror games are just a cheap excuse to dump all your ammo into some bulky twat with a drinks cabinet for a face. And while these concepts are painfully archaic, I am a sucker for a good boss fight, and I'm happy to report that this one was pretty fun. But this abrasive display highlights a problem with this blingy do-over. That it runs like f***ing shit. Granted, I played this on Microsoft's PC box, with specs I won't bore you to death with, which are well within the recommended bracket, but as you can see, the price of progress means more dropped frames than an amputee window fitter. But I will say that most of the blame could be pointed towards the Unreal Engine 5, which seems to take a shit on any PC it happens to grace, no matter the game or optimizations made by the devs, which of course does not include its cash cow, where the flossing never stops. But when you're trying to build a game with an engine that can do all the cool shit but runs like an asthmatic twat, this lump of contempt starts to build in my throat. Oh, it might be fine on consoles, but I'm not forking over $500 plus for a Funbox 5 with no sodding games. Call me petty, which I am, but I was so annoyed with this engine, any title using it makes me not want to play it. Especially when the back half of this playthrough was plagued with so many crashes and other cock-ups, I wasn't sure I'd be able to finish it for this video. And while the community has been trying to get the game to run at a decent tip, these backyard patches bring their own issues, which are so frequent I can't be to mention. So, just like our boy, we as the player are doomed to deal with stuttering and blue screening trauma. So while it's on theme, I will continue to stab my voodoo doll of Tim Sweeney in the taint with a sharpened frame spike in my own time.
If I can't help falling in love with you.
And after that therapy session, we bump into Maria, being her flirty, mildly threatening self. And then we run around a town for a bit, trying to do a puzzle to unlock this sodding gate. Which is galling, considering we have an entire backpack full of shit that would easily sort out this problem. Video games. Anyway, while our new sidekick flashes her old outfit at you to make you point at the screen like your dad watching burlesque for the millionth bloody time, we move past this shit and bumble our way into the bowling alley. But instead of bumping into Eddie, and of course that little scrote Laura, we just wallow in rose-tinted bollocks for the sake of... Nah, I'm kidding, they're in the cinema next door. And I would elaborate, but this whole bit is just a session of following the bratty leader to the Brookhaven Hospital, which, just like the apartments, is centered around a main puzzle, while you, of course, batter sexy nurses to death. Yeah, the embodiment of James's darkest desires. And other dark pondering, dark pondering, dark pondering, dark pondering, dark pondering. Isn't our boy a complicated He makes Ted Bundy look like James May.
The man is a knob, but I quite like him.
Sadly, Jimmy is too busy getting into shenanigans to bore us to death with his incel manifesto, thank God, as his clownery puts him back in the otherworld, which is now adorned with foreskins on the walls, like Walter Sullivan's wallpaper shop. God, could you imagine the smell? Well, ignore that, and get a load of this ambience instead. It's still on point, but here is where a nagging doubt started to cloud my enjoyment. While there is a solid gameplay loop, and the toe-curling punch-ups with a conga line of Sunday's fetishes is enjoyable, the feeling of this remake plateauing, gameplay-wise, was the lingerie-wearing rotten elephant in the room, which would be a fun foe if this remake was sponsored by Cabela. But this is where, for my tastes, this revamp begins to falter. While its emphasis on combat is genuinely thrilling, the actual strategy to surpass your horrific roadblocks rarely changes, apart from changing the difficulty that adjusts the amount of punishment they can take, and of course the otherworld, making them more aggressive. However, even with these variants, they start to get old, due to this limited collection of foes. And I know what I'm saying here is blasphemy, but this lingering feeling of repetition started to grind me down. I mean, James must have some more grubby desires we could batter, right? Maybe a sentient cum rag, or a pair of French knickers covered in Marmite, or, I don't know, something like the character artist that's been tirelessly tracing over Masahiro Ito's stroke material would be dying to include. I mean, you spent all this effort to bring Silent Hill 2 back, with all these extra bells and whistles hanging off it, like an overcompensating Morris dancer, so f*** it. Go off, Queen. Why don't you throw a few curveballs, you know, jump that shark, and then we can beat it to death like a baby seal made of sin. Sorry, I'm getting excited again. And while I could continue to kick shins, my biggest axe to grind, while not technically a fault of this remake, it does ironically accentuate this gripe I've had with Silent Hill 2 since 2001, that the pacing in the back half is a bit all over the place. And while that's a minor annoyance here in the hospital, from the point where the Pyramid Ponce grabs our leading knobhead to hurl him back down to Patina Purgatory, until you reach the hotel, the final part of the game, this oppressive feeling never lets up. Which on its face seems fine, as it's supposed to be a horror game and they are supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. But for me, while it's doing its job extremely bloody well, this prolonged exposure to this oppression starts to become tiring. Especially when you could play and complete the original in a lazy afternoon, with all its peaks and spooky valleys being a steady incline up to this point. But now with the remake taking an average of 10 to 15 hours to beat, coupled with this approach to make everything more significant, this section of the adventure, while originally stressful and exhilarating, becomes a chore. Because when you have all the tension all of the time, you end up with no tension. Without moments of calm, the constant turning of the creepy screw for hours upon hours becomes mind-numbing. But then we have the Silent Hill Historical Society, and the subsequent descent into Toluca Prison, which, if you haven't seen my video on the original, is one of my favourite levels in games. And in this go around, it's filled with nerdy goodies, like this picture of the Little Baroness, the setting for Silent Hill the arcade game, a send-up of the House of the Dead, which is something so my shit it should be illegal. And yes, one of the boss fights is Pyramid Pete, because nothing is sacred. Oh, and one of your buddies in this game is a white guy posing as a Rasta. And no, the offspring isn't on the OST. Oh, and there's penis worms in the prison. Penis worms! See, Bluebird, that's what you're missing. We could have done with a couple of these in the Smegma ward. That being said, the atmosphere that made this place so memorable back in 2001 is intact, and, in fact, it's been cranked up a couple of hundred notches. So while I was feeling the burn, with being constantly under the thumb, the prison still freaked my balls off. So it gets an exhaustive thumbs up from me. And then after being stuck on this hamster wheel that's the same length as the entirety of the original game, the new labyrinth kicks open the door in a drunken stupor to stink up the place. And yes, I know the lab is Sunday's symbolic descent, his downward spiral by 9 Inch Nails, but the structure here is exactly the same as every major area in this remake. So that means that spinny head cube thingy is now more than a throwaway moment. And now you must use it to move to other wings of this place to work out puzzles. The problem here is, in this new version, in my opinion once again, it just feels aimless. Yes, it's to simulate the emotions our boy is going through, and now his nuclear bewilderment after seeing Maria alive and bitching after being turned into a bunny boiling kebab. At least this feeling of confusion in the OG was fleeting, and the urge to get out of the spiral of madness kept me going then. But once again, everything is bloated and 3 times longer. And I know this is a protracted rant, but this is a prime example of adapting others' works. In this haze of trying to make the minor shit stick, the smell in doing so can be overbearing. And while the original could be flushed in one, this gross analogy for Silent Hill 2 Remake drinks all the water in a pan. At least the fight with Angela's daddy, where he cum blasts through the walls to give you a hug, slapped me out of this brain rot, and genuinely made me swear like a sailor trying to dodge his jerky attacks. It's pretty cool. Shame I can't say that with a square up with Eddie. Yeah, sure, he's another dark reflection of our protagonist, and other lofty worded bollocks. The thing is, I always felt bad for killing his pathetic ass, and now he's been given this facelift that makes him look like an unwashed murderous Teletubby. It's a tad too close to home. Also in this remake, Sunday doesn't say that line after you kill him.
Eddie? Eddie? I killed a human being. A human being.
Which in hindsight is probably for the best. But this is all swept away with seeing the fog once again in Talk about the relief, especially with the knowledge that I'm heading to Jimmy's special place. And another fave of mine, the hotel. And just look at it. Yes, it's another do 3 things to progress level, but holy shit. The ambience, the decadence, it's got it all. I love its Agatha Christie style murder mystery vibe. Granted, you are not here to sleuth like an emotionally unstable Hercule Poirot, but yeah, it would be a perfect backdrop. And just like Miss Marple, James must use his intuition to get to the basement to grab a videotape, which is now a stealth section. Well, stealth is in run around like a scared tit while avoiding a monster called a mandarin? What kind of name is that? It doesn't even look like a fruit. What about, I don't know, Marky Minge Mitts? Yeah, never mind. And while I could continue to make jokes about the terrible monster monikers, Jimmy finally pulls up his big boy pants and watches this mucky movie that I'm gonna have to blur out in fear of being demonetized because I want to eat my Mars bar when this video gets uploaded. I mean, damn, the original hinted at this moment, but this remake really puts you in there. So much I'm surprised they didn't ask you to slap X to do the f***ing deed. And just like eating a chocolate-covered turd, on realization that Jimbo is a wife-killing cockwomble, his puzzled demeanor gives way to soul-crushing despair. And with his world, metaphorically and literally, crumbling around him, our quote hero must face his final judgment. In fewer words, Maria gets stuck like a lap dancing pig, while James screams like all the simps realizing that their digital temptress isn't real. And while that is heartbreaking, at least they kept the boss fight, where you have to take on these sweaty bellends in stereo. And yes, it's just as dull as the original. Then we bump into Angela to finish her brilliant yet gut-wrenching story. And oh look who it is! Yes, it's Maria posing as Mary to throw another wrench into Jimmy's journey of jerking his guilty gherkin, which he sidesteps with the grace and power of firearms. And with that, and my due diligence of looking at Mary's letter, and looking at her photograph, which is legit and not a mod I used as a visual gag for this video, our avatar makes peace with his other half. Which of course made me cry as it gets me every cocking time. And then we close with James walking out of town with his surrogate daughter, to a Peanuts music rendition of Laura's theme. By the sounds of those guitar licks, it sounds like Yamaoka played it with his knob too. And while it's copying its homework, SH2R does enough to make this go-around unique. In the limited created sandbox of a game so revered, you would think it's the second coming of Rusty Jesus. And that's my thing with most remakes. Instead of giving a title that was received like a wet fart on launch, most publishers go for the path of least resistance. And while that outburst sounds like I'm being cynical, that's not the case. That's just economics. Besides, these newer depictions are not marketed to people like me. No, remakes such as this are for a new generation of players, who weren't even alive when the original was relevant. And while I could continue to ponder the existential and philosophical bollocks of interactive art, overall, I quite enjoyed my time with this revision. While it did signal boost elements of the original that weren't to my taste 2 decades ago, I have to give it the Bloober for putting their entire arse into it. To me, there isn't a single whiff of obligation here, and the boo boys who made lengthy screeds about it being soulless is more of a reflection on them, as critics, than the game itself. Yes, I had some technical issues, which are annoying and baffling, but ultimately stuff like that can be fixed. So damning it outright on this aspect would be unfair. Also, SH2R is a presentation powerhouse, and when the engine it's built upon wasn't shitting itself into a coma, this world rocked my cock off, and most importantly, the emotional core remains intact, and in places has been improved with the new toys modern games allow. So as a novelty, the remake of Silent Hill 2 hooked me in, and put me through the ringer, and then made me realise how much I love the original. And as a Silent Hill fan, if you couldn't guess that by my constant whining, it's actually nice to play a game that isn't a complete insult. Sure, it's treading the same ground, but even with its rougher edges, it's a perfectly serviceable experience. And I think the only other loaded question is, will I ever play this version again? And I don't know. If they bring out an expanded version of Born from a Wish, then maybe, but to me the original, while shorter, moves at such a pace that its weaker moments never outstay their welcome. In the end, this project felt like a necessary step that put the franchise in a better place, and IMHO, it did its job well. All in all, it was a cathartic line in the sand, an artistic timeline cleanse. That will tie us over to the next horrifying trek into this borough of bastards. So in the meantime, why not peruse the official Silent Hill merch shop, where you can buy Sunday's iconic jacket. Yes, for the fan who has everything, apart from the guts to get a f***ing divorce. Now you can put a pillow over your partner's face in style. Yes, gladly drip your oryxidal tendencies in this overpriced windbreaker, made for no one. Sure, tasteless as it may be, at least it's not a fucking Funko Pop.